India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will hold an informal two-day summit today with Chinese President Xi Jinping in the central Chinese city of Wuhan. When he arrived, a convoy of 28 vehicles escorted him to his hotel in Wuhan. The two leaders are seeking to reset bilateral ties post the Doklam crisis in August last year. Before leaving for China, the Prime Minister, in a statement, said he hopes to discuss several bilateral issues of global importance with the Chinese president. Despite the informal nature of the summit, both leaders are expected to spend a considerable time with each other. Joining us in our studios is Arun Singh, a former senior diplomat. He served as ambassador in several countries. Thank you so much. Good morning. We've heard the Indian side repeatedly saying these are informal talks. This is not the normal bilateral summit. But both leaders would go in with something in their heads at least.
So you're right, Amitabh. There's no set agenda on paper. But clearly in their minds, they would have an agenda and they would have discussed it. And given the history over the past 1 year, where we had some difficulties in the relationship because of what happened at Doklam, China blocking us at NSG. So I think there would be some discussion on how to address the border issue going forward. If either through resolution, if not that, what kind of understanding, confidence building measures. There's also bound to be some discussion on the economic issues because China is our largest trading partner, but there's a huge imbalance. How do we address that? How do we look at Chinese investments? At one level, we may want Chinese investments, but we would not want it in the strategic sectors. We would not want it in sectors that cause us any security concerns.
And there's a certain model, like even China followed with other countries setting up manufacturing in China in the past, which is what India would be looking at when you're talking about economic.
And Chinese model has evolved. In the beginning, they invited companies to come and invest in China. Now they have become very tough on them, asking them, restricting their access in terms of investments and the Chinese market and asking them to transfer technologies to Chinese entities. So there's a reaction to that. So we have to see how do we move forward. At one level, it would be useful to have Chinese stakes in the Indian economy, but then how do you protect your security? That I'm sure there would be some discussion from our point of view. How do we see China's expanding footprint, including in the Indian Ocean, in our neighborhood? How do we ensure that that doesn't cause us any concerns based on what they're doing in Pakistan, in Gwadar, in Sri Lanka, the Hambantota port, in Maldives recently, or in Nepal? So we'd like to understand that, and we'd like to be assured that it won't cause us any concern. China may want to understand our approach in terms of the Indo-Pacific, our cooperation with the US, the trilateral India, US, Japan, the Quad, those dimensions would come in. And I'm sure there's also about to be some discussion on what's happening at the global level. Because globally there's huge flux.
Protectionism, globalization, trade, tariffs, the trade war that the US is threatening against them, and could possibly have a front against the US on that front.
Well, I don't know whether it makes sense for us to have a front against the US because we have huge equities and stakes in the US. It's our largest trading partner. We have a large Indian origin diaspora in the US. It's the US where most of our students go to study in universities. So I don't think it would make sense to have a front as such. But certainly there are convergence of interests on trade issues, and we'd like to see if there's any harmonization possible there. But there is otherwise tremendous flux at the global level. Relations between US and Russia, for example. How is that evolving? And as a result, Russia has become even more dependent on China. Russia is reaching out to Pakistan.
In Syria, and how China has been watching the US versus Russia there as well. Let's get in a little bit more. We also have Professor Chen Hong, who is the Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Studies Group in China's Normal University. He joins us live as well as Palki Sharma Upadhyay, who is following those developments closely in Wuhan. Palki, as we were talking here, is what is the expectation that what will they really talk about?
If I had to give you 4 or 5 pointers, I think border resolution is something that is going to be on top of the minds of both the leaders. And I say border resolution and not border management. This is what we are being given to understand, that all these years when we've had these meetings of special representatives of the border, I believe 20 meetings in 14 years, they've essentially looked at border management Now, these two leaders want to put this behind them, and they're looking at border resolution, which cannot happen without Tibet, the issue of Tibet being resolved, and it is extremely complicated. So a breakthrough may not emerge just yet, but this is the start. That is one thing. The second is, of course, BRI. China very much wants India to be a part of it, which is where Pakistan and CPEC comes in. So they'll have to work out the modalities. They'll have to work out how far each side is prepared to give and take in this respect. Trade and investment is very, very important. China feels cornered post the trade war, we are told, with the US, or the tensions that have arisen in the recent past. And it looks at India as a strong ally, as someone who can stand with China. So China is looking at India in that respect. And India, of course, wants Chinese investments. Remember, the Prime Minister of India, when he came to power, made a lot of promises, and if you want those bullet trains, if you want that kind of infrastructure development, if you see this city, I would like to show it to you later in the day once the security men here allow us to go out. But I can tell you that for a tier 2 city, Wuhan is very well developed. You have skyscrapers, you have a bustling city center, and this is what the Prime Minister of India wants to replicate. So is he going to take a leaf out of the Chinese book? We'll have to see. India's membership to the Security Council as a permanent member is something that we understand is going to be talked about, and China may relent. These are just feelers. This is all informed speculation, but I can tell you that there's a strong buzz here. And of course, the other things that are going to be a part of the freewheeling conversation, they're going to be talking about global issues, how India and China as two leaders can come together and give a new direction, can take the driver's seat on global platforms like the WTO, etc. So this is not just about the bilateral relationship. This is about steering the geopolitical events here on.
Okay, again, while expectation has been lowered in a sense in terms of if it was an actual normal bilateral relation, not a informal one, the Indian side is saying that they will be talking about strategic and big issues. Will possibly the issue of Masood Azhar, the NSG membership, come up at all, or is that something that the Chinese leadership doesn't go into specifics at this level?
Expectation management is the word that they're using, because remember, when India and China talk at this level, when the Prime Minister visits after a Doklam-like situation, and this is going to be, he's going to be making 2 visits in 2 months. This is the first one, and then for the SCO summit. The expectations are very high, and they do not want this meeting to be held hostage to that kind of expectation and buzz, which is why the Chinese press is also underplaying. This is not a full-page, front-page story in the Chinese media. It's tucked away somewhere on the 3rd page. They're looking at letting the leaders talk without the burden of expectations. That is what we are being told, and take it forward from there. So yes, they do not want to promise anything just yet, and they want to see what.
Okay, Sharma Upadhyay reporting live from Wuhan. That is the hotel where the Prime Minister is staying. I believe it is called the WION. Rain will get you more on that. Professor Chen Hong also joining us, the Executive Director of the Asia Pacific Studies School in China's Normal Universities. Professor Hon, we were talking about expectations. Now, we've seen a change, if we can call it that, in how the Chinese media has been reporting India over the last little less than 1 year. But today, if I look at the People's Daily, the front page has a full treatment of President Xi's visit to the Three Gorges Dam. The Wuhan summit is on page 3, and it just gets a brief mention. What is the expectation in China itself?
Well, I think over the 2 days of today and tomorrow, the Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Modi will be having the series of talks in Wuhan. So this has been interpreted in China as an indication that China and India are joining hands in coping with this changing world. Both China and India are major developing countries in Asia with the biggest populations and markets. So in China's understanding for both President Xi and Prime Minister Modi to meet and exchange ideas with a common aim to promote mutual understanding and cooperation, this is definitely of a significant importance region and also to the world. Since President Xi assumed office, he has met with Prime Minister Modi 13 times. So even during the Dockland, incident last year, both President Xi and Prime Minister Modi exerted their wisdom to dispel suspicions and distrust. And during the meeting with Prime Minister Modi in Xiamen in September last year, a consensus was reached to work towards better relations instead of exacerbating the situation. And last year, the trade volume between China and India was $84.5 billion. China remains India's largest trade partner. India is of crucial importance to China's overseas investments and international business collaboration. There's a steady or increasing volume of personnel exchanges with, which will be promoting, understanding and friendship. So there are indeed differences, yes, between our two countries, but courageous and wise leaders are able to see common grounds while endeavoring to solve and simply putting aside differences, such as the best practical attitudes we need to assume to ensure that we progress towards a better shared future.
Right. You're talking about differences and convergence. Let's look at this is when the heads of two big Asian economies, India and China, are coming together for those talks. Let's look at more reactions where the Indian industry has put forward its expectations from this informal meeting. The industry captains say as China is heavily subsidizing its goods and even sometimes selling them below cost, New Delhi must demand a level playing field.
Well, I think
I'll just come to you, sir. We're getting this reaction from one of our industry captains.
Okay.
India has to be amongst the three top economies in the world. And today we are amongst the largest emerging economy, which is growing at the fastest pace. Continuous engagement, continuous dialogue is always very good. You can resolve matters, resolve issues sitting across the table. And especially the trade wars which we are seeing, or artificial trade barriers which are being put under the protectionism, whatever we are seeing, we need to see the final outcome, how does it pan out. Though I believe this is not good, because if you see last couple of decades, the world has benefited from open global trade. But this is something we'll have to wait and see.
And there is a huge trade deficit between India and China. In fact, now we started taking this matter seriously. Just now, last month, we had a meeting between the commerce ministers of both countries. Do you think we are late in admitting this, and we are late in addressing this biggest concern we were facing from the last many years?
I think, I would say any action being taken should not be seen as late or too late. We need to appropriately support the government on inputs from the industry. And the government then needs to take necessary actions to mitigate those risks. Globally, everyone knows Chinese companies have been supplying products at much cheaper costs on account of huge hidden subsidies on the support which they get. Having said that, there needs to be a level playing field for the Indian industry as well. On the other hand, I would also say Indian industry need to and must invest to become competitive globally. I mean, if you see the auto sector, the auto parts, we are competing with the world today. So similarly, I think it's difficult for me to address all the sectors, but given that China has been pumping products at probably below cost, that's what our belief is. The government must take necessary action.
So one last question to you would be, at the same time, a big summit is happening where North and South Korea are coming together. Also now, Donald Trump, US President, and it looks like that North Korea, they both are reaching to some conclusion, or truce at least. So then this stability is here to stay, and it will be in favor of the whole global economy.
Certainly, yes. I think it is good for the region. It's good for the entire world. And I think when President Kim talked about now opening up the economic sectors for development of North Korea, I think there is an opportunity for global companies and countries to engage with them. And I only wish that we see a positive outcome on this, which can only be more productive for global economies as a whole.
All right, so thank you and wish you all the best. Thanks for giving this opportunity.
Thank you.
Global markets, in fact, have opened to green, including the Indian markets on the back of both these summits. We'll get you more on that. Professor Chen, thank you so much for joining us from Shanghai.